Welcome to Sensational Living with Liliana. As you can see, I'm not in my kitchen this afternoon, so I won't be giving you a sensational recipe, but I am going to give you a sensational recipe for life. We're going to talk about those foods that turn into sugar and how to balance them out. This is a conversation that I get in with my patients daily, and in fact, it's always quite funny when patients don't realize that some of the foods that they eat are causing their problems. Now, we are hardwired for sugar. In fact, it is one of the most pleasurable foods that our brain can enjoy. It's a preferred fuel, actually, in terms of it's easy to break down. But what we don't realize is that carbohydrates in and of themselves are not essential, like protein and fats. For example, if we eat too much protein, we can actually convert it into a type of a sugar called glycogen and store it for fuel. If we eat fats and we have them plentiful, our body also stores those and utilizes them for fuel as well. So in essence, the carbohydrates, that what I will be talking about in length today, are necessary, but only necessary to the point that we're using them in adjunct in a way of balancing out a meal. Now, for example, all foods that grow from the ground are considered sugar. Obviously, they have amino acids and other components in them as well, but the majority of those nutrients break down into glucose. Now, what I tell my patients is that there's not a good and bad food. If it's organic and it's in a natural state, all food are good. What we want to look at are those foods that are potentially for treatment or prevention. Now, I like to split the carbohydrates right down the middle in regards to superior carbohydrates, which is really superior sugars, and inferior carbohydrates, which again is sugars. Now, one of the things that's really important is to understand that all foods that grow from the plant kingdom are sugar. Whether they're a vegetable, a fruit, a bean, or a grain, they all break down to glucose. So if I were going to just divide them right down the middle, I would say that the superior category are all those foods that are very distinguishably not sweet. So if I put broccoli or lettuce or cauliflower or Brussels sprouts or asparagus or any lettuce for that matter of fact, it's bitter to its taste. You would never say that it's sweet. Now, on the contrary, those foods that are sweet are going to be 2 to 3 times higher in glucose than those foods that are what we call non-starchy carbohydrates. Now, the foods that are non-starchy carbohydrates, it's not that they are bad food, and I really want to reiterate that because all things in their organic state are good. But when it comes to treatment, whether it's diabetes or whether it's weight loss or a treatment such as cancer, we really want to make sure that the foods that we're consuming don't turn into excess in terms of the load, what our body is able to utilize. So for example, those foods that are considered higher in glucose are all, I call them expansive foods. For example, anything that gets larger than its original state is expansive. If I put grains in water, what do? They absorb the water and they expand. When I make bread, it rises. When I make cookies or cakes, they rise. They are expansive. So if you want to expand your waistline or potentially expand your problem, then those are the foods that you would eat and find that you would be getting very good results. Now, it's not that I'm opposed to eating these foods, but these foods we want to eat in very small quantity. For example, those foods that are expansive but don't actually get larger than their original state are things like potatoes, whether they're a sweet potato or a white potato or a red potato. They don't get any larger, but they don't get any smaller. So I call them stubborn foods. Stubborn is they're not releasing anything and letting things go. So for example, like spinach, you can have 10 cups of spinach and it reduces down to 1 cup. It releases, it lets go, which means that it's also going to potentially help you in releasing your problem. So potatoes, carrots, beets, corn, peas, those are all sweet to the palate. So it's really easy to distinguish between those foods that are bitter to the palate, which are considered superior non-starchy carbohydrates, very, very low in calories, very low in carbohydrates as well, and sugars. And then those foods, on the other hand, that we want to either limit or avoid if we're trying to treat specific conditions. So for example, we have also beans. Now beans are considered carbohydrate protein. So they have almost equal amount of protein and carbohydrate because they have a generous amount of fiber. So again, I tell patients if you want to keep beans in your diet, which I do like as a vegetarian source of protein, I say use that as your one protein. So you can use it as a vegetarian supplement. You can use it as a vegetarian, instead of having meat, you can have beans. So it could be a substitute, or you have to look at it as a high starchy carbohydrate. Now what does that mean? Now if I have foods that are tortilla that doesn't excrete any water, right, I can squeeze it as hard as I could and not a drop of water is going to come out. So again, that is going to be a high starchy, high sugar carbohydrate food. So if I have beans that I cannot squeeze an ounce of water out either, both of these foods exist in the same family. So you can only have one on your plate or another. So there goes the theory of rice and beans or tortilla and beans, which is a favorite of most people when they go to Mexican food. But unfortunately, it's also high in sugar. So I tell my patients, enjoy these foods, but at the same time, utilize only one of them on your plate. So if you've got beans, I tell them pair it with a very low sugar food, which is a non-starchy carbohydrate, like salads. So a nice salad with beans on top with some good fats like guacamole and some salsa on there. You can have a perfectly great vegetarian, very satisfying meal, but you're keeping your carbs down really, really low. Now, if you want to have rice and other grains, and I'm not opposed to them, but again, we want to look at them as a condiment. Because unfortunately, 2 tablespoons of any cooked grain, whether it is a millet, quinoa, brown rice, wild rice, 2 tablespoons cooked is 9 grams of carbohydrate. That's approximately 2 cubes of sugar. Now, who doesn't love rice? I mean, for goodness sakes, I could eat a whole bowl of rice, but the problem is that's it. You can just keep eating and eating because you don't get satiated. There's no essentials in it, so by the time you really feel full, you've eaten more than really on a cellular level that your body can handle in terms of its energy, and then you end up converting it into fat. So I tell my patients if they want to do grains, look at them, as something that they would add to. Like I would do a beautiful kale salad, and then I would add some quinoa in there just for some texture, for some, crunch to it. Or I would have, for example, a beautiful soup, and I would add a little bit of rice in there just to give it a little bit of texture. So again, we don't have to give up our favorite food. What we have to recognize is that it turns into an excessive amount of glucose if we're not careful, expanding our problem, expanding our waistline, and then we never really get to what we really want to succeed at, is that healthy, slim figure that most everybody wants. Now, another thing that I always tell patients that's really, really important is that when you look at these foods, last week we talked about food combining. Now, for example, beans, I said they are both a protein and a carbohydrate, so they're very, very hard to digest. So one of the things that I do suggest is that when you make beans that you sprout them. And really all you need to do is put a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar in a cup of beans, 4 cups of water, leave it on your counter and let it sit there overnight. And that vinegar breaks down the phytic acid that's in beans. It makes it very, very hard to digest. In the morning, throw out the water, put new water in, cook your beans, and it makes it a much more digestible food. And again, I would use this as an alternative to meat, making a nice lentil soup with a salad. You always want to pair any of your food with live food, green. So anything that I would have as far as any kind of starchy carbohydrate, I'm always going to have a large salad with it. Now, we talked about the foods that turn into sugar. Now, we didn't talk about fruit. Now, fruit is sweet. Remember, I said anything that is sweet to the palate is 2 to 3 times higher of sugar. Anything that cannot squeeze water out of it is expansive and is very high in sugar as well. So we talked last week about food combining, and that fruits it moves very quickly out of the stomach and it moves into the small intestine very quickly. And so we don't really want to eat those with any other foods like your grains or like proteins. And so again, now think about this, there's also bitter fruit in the category of sweet. So berries are bitter than banana, and green apple is more bitter than, let's just say, mango, and kiwi is more bitter than pineapple. So I tell my patients who are really trying to work on a specific, whether it's cancer or diabetes or weight loss, is just take the tropical foods out of the diet as mouth-watering as they are. Nobody loves mango more than me, but you want to really keep those out of the diet in the beginning stages of really in your treatment phase. I tell patients, once you get to where you want to go and you create a set point means that you're at the weight you want to be, you've achieved the goal that you wanted to have, well then you can give yourself a little bit of leeway. So let's just say on the weekend you decide to have, a little bit more carbohydrates than normal, well then you gain 2 pounds, 2 to 3 at the most, but 4 or 5 days later, back on your regime, you lose it and you're back where you started. So that's called a set point. But until you really get there, you never really will be able to accomplish your goals by really working towards, losing the weight, or working on lowering your blood sugar, or really working on trying to decrease the food that cancer loves. Cancer has 91 doorways to allow sugar to enter as fuel, and a healthy cell only has 4. So you can kind of see what its preferred fuel is. Not only is it our preferred fuel as far for muscle movement and brain functionality, but it's also all of the bugs that coexist with us in a heart. Unfortunately, you can get rid of all of the microorganisms. It's called the biome, but you want to keep the healthy up and the unhealthy ones, parasites, fungus, and also things that thrive off of sugar, like cancer. You want to keep the food that they thrive on to the very, very, very minimal amount. And so again, fruit, the bitter better all the time, and that's really how you want to look at it. If it's bitter, it will always be better. So again, in the fruit category, I like the berries because of the eulogenic acid in it, which is really wonderful as a cancer-fighting agent. And when it comes to the grains, of course, I always go gluten-free. But then again, I use it really cautiously, just like I would use alcohol. And I would put a couple tablespoons in kale salad. I would throw a couple tablespoons in some, soup. One of the things that patients absolutely love, especially if it's going to be cold and wintry, is oatmeal. And so I said, okay, well, you don't have to give up oatmeal. You can find a gluten-free oatmeal, no problem. But rather than all oats, because I'm going to talk about how to balance out the sugars in just a moment, you put a couple of tablespoons of oatmeal into some nut milk, and then you put a tablespoon of chia seed, which will expand beautifully. And of course, you got to keep adding the liquid because it'll get thick and glumpy, which is no fun. Then once you take that off of the stove, you add a couple of tablespoons of hemp seed to give it some protein to balance it out a little bit, some chopped up walnuts, and you have more of a nut cereal, which is awesome. So then again, you can enjoy that cereal. It's warm, it's very satiating, it fills you up, but at the same time, you're not overpowering it and not tipping the scale and having too much sugar. You've got that hemp seeds and the nuts that'll bring in the protein and the fats in there, but you're keeping the carbohydrates down to a very minimum. Now, there's all sorts of paleo breads and gluten-free breads that are very, very low carbohydrate. We did a recipe with the beef-free bread and made a wonderful pizza. You can make quesadillas out of it. You can make all kinds of wonderful things out of it. So you can find them. But again, the word total carbohydrates means total sugar. Now, you can always take the fiber and deduct that. So as that tortilla was, it was 13 carbohydrates minus the 6 on the fiber, which became 7 grams of carbohydrates. So wonderful. It still fits into the dynamics of the chemistry that we're looking at. I tell patients it's really important when they come to me, we establish what their basal metabolic rate is. It means how many calories that they need in a day just to basically perform your basic metabolic functions, your heartbeat, your GI system, and so forth. And so with that number, I'm able to shift their calories around so that we can achieve the goals we're looking for. And then again, how many, depending on their lab work, if they have diabetes and so forth, I never give a patient more than, let's just say, 12% of their overall calories in glucose. So remember, when you're looking at a label, the word total carbohydrates, regardless whether it says it has sugar in it or not, and if it does, that sugar's already added into the word total, means total sugar. So they will become synonymous from now on. So when we look at it again, those bitter, better foods are always superior. Your lettuces, your cucumber, all your cruciferous vegetables, your asparagus, your broccoli, your eggplant, your portobello mushrooms, fabulous. 3/4 of your plate really should be filled with this food. And when you've got a full plate, you're already feeling content. The eyes are very satiated to see fullness on the plate. So you've got your salads and your vegetables. I always say, you know, some raw food is wonderful, so we've got some live enzymes. In the beginning, I said that that carbohydrates weren't essential, but the essential part about a carbohydrate is this. You need the water that's in these foods, you need the fiber that is in the food, you need enzymes that's in the food. Now you can't get those out of meat, or you can't get those out of nuts and beans and things of that nature. So it's essential that we have vegetables in our diet, but again, what we are looking for is the superior quality that has that. And it's really interesting that patients will think that all these grains have such an incredible amount of fiber in it, but honestly, a piece of bread, 20 grams of carbohydrate with 3 grams of fiber is still going to yield 17 grams of sugar. And if you have 2 tablespoons of unsweetened coconut, you've got 7 carbohydrates, but 5 grams of fiber. That leaves you with a net 2 grams of sugar. So how great is that to throw into your shake? Rather than a banana that could be 27 grams of carbohydrates, sure, it's wonderful. So I'll give you a little key, a little rule to stand by. Any of these foods that are expansive, which means that they get larger than their original state, and or they don't shrink, cut them in half. So if I'm eating a banana, half a banana. If I'm having a potato, half a potato. If I go out to dinner and they give me, you know, rice or any other starch, eat half of it. Because then that way you're combining it so that you don't throw yourself over the edge. Remember, what we're looking at is how much glucose, which is the load of that food, can actually enter the cell wall and be utilized as fuel. Now, it's interesting to know what I cannot utilize, I'm going to store it just like anything else. And our fat cells happen to be our garages in our body. And so, unfortunately, when we eat these foods, you know, what we can't utilize, we start to store them. First, the liver takes it, and then the muscles take it. Then the fat cells will accommodate us. But unfortunately, when the fat cells get full, what begins to happen? We start dumping it down into the liver. And it's really interesting because I have many patients that come in and have non-alcoholic livers. And in fact, they're not even obese. And what happens is that their body, in terms of their ability to utilize glucose, becomes impaired, and they start dumping it down into the liver. And usually these people have an issue with detoxification. You know, that's a whole nother subject that I'll talk to you about, which is absolutely fascinating. Because if you don't detox well, unfortunately, your fat cells are going to take the brunt of it because they will store your toxins. So now we looked at food, we looked at everything that turns into sugar, whether it is a vegetable, and if they're not sweet to the taste, they're bitter, those are fabulous. Those are our superior foods. We looked at those vegetables that are slightly sweet, whether it's a carrot, a beet, a corn, a pea. They're still wonderful, but they're higher, 2 to 3 times higher in sugar, so I'm going to use them very sparingly on my plate. But now they belong to the family of high carbohydrates, so we're only allowed 1 on our team. So if we've got carrots on our team, we don't get potatoes on our team. And what is so often served? Potatoes or carrots and peas, so often. And so again, those are 2 high sugar foods on your plate. So again, what you're going to pay attention to is, where do I want to put my glucose? Of course, I didn't talk about wine, but wine, it goes unsaid. It's sugar. So I tell my patients, if you want to have a glass of wine, you give up the bread, you give up your potato, anything that would be considered a high sugar foods, you've got to give those up and have a glass of wine and have a beautiful salad, nice portion of vegetables, and then your protein, and then you've got a pretty balanced meal, and you can enjoy yourself and have a good time. So it's not that we are trying to inhibit you from having fun. Far from that at all. What I want you to do is have great digestion, vibrancy in your health, and all it takes is just a little consciousness and awareness to know that all plant food turn into glucose. So sugar, I always say, you know, not all sugar is equal. At the same time, what we want to pay attention to when we have a problem, diabetes, heart disease, there's those foods we really want to avoid because they don't fit into our equation. So when you come to me as a patient, you know, we get very clear, and I give you a very mathematical equation so that you go home and you know exactly what you need to do. This is the elements of outside. I'm here in beautiful Orange County by the ocean, but yeah, we've got the ocean going and we've got the airplanes overhead, so it's fantastic. Now what I want to do now is I want to talk to you about how to balance out that glucose. Now, protein is the opposing hormonal response to sugar. So of course, remember we talked about all protein comes from things that have eyeballs on it. So if I have an egg, it came from a chicken with eyes. If I had dairy, it came from a cow that had eyes. So honestly, it's really easy to distinguish if it's a protein in part of the animal family. Then again, we want to pay attention to those proteins that are going to be suitable in regards to our digestion. Now, there's also going to be protein in beans. We talked about that earlier. Now we got a wonderful train going across. So bear with me. This is the beauty about the elements of the outdoors. So again, now there's a lot of vegetarians out there that are, their eyebrows are raising when I'm talking about animal protein. So you don't need to have animal protein because there's hemp seeds and there's chia seeds and there's nuts and there's beans, and honestly there's protein and constituents in every food. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a balance. So if I have a scale here and I've got, let's just say for example, I've got a nice large salad. That's going to be 3 cups of lettuce, cucumber, tomato, and bell pepper. All of that is only 9 carbohydrates. Okay, so I'm looking pretty good. Then I have, for example, a half of a potato. That automatically is 27 grams of sugar. So between that 27 and that pretty much 10 grams of carbs, I'm looking at 40 grams of sugar on my plate. Well, if I just eat that by itself, my blood sugar is going to come up and it's going to spike right down, and I'll guarantee you, you will be hungry in an hour and a half. It will not satiate you because we didn't put that most important element of balancing out the blood sugar. So again, you've got to have that protein. Protein is the hormonal opposite. So again, we want that scale. We don't want too high carbohydrates and too low protein because you'll still get a spike. Now, I tell my patients you can have a little higher protein and a little less carbohydrate. That's okay. That's called weight loss. That's called a treatment program. But you never want to go in the opposing of high carbohydrates and low protein. So for example, kind of think of it like this. The palm of your hand and the thickness will be your animal protein. Okay? If you're using beans, for a woman, it's going to be about a half a cup. But no more than that because it's going to be too many carbohydrates. And so again, a man's palm is going to be a lot thicker than his wife's palm, so he needs it accordingly to his metabolic needs. And then you want to think about fats. So fats slow everything down into the bloodstream. It's kind of like the putting on the brakes. So again, you've got your big salad on your plate. You've got your as much broccoli or any of those watery vegetables that you want. You've got a piece of chicken or salmon on your plate. You've got your beautiful olive oil salad dressing. You have got a perfectly balanced meal to treat or to prevent. And this is what our goal is, right? We want to have, we're living a lot longer, but we want to be functional. We want to have that vitality, that zest, that home mindset of sensational lifestyle. Very, very important. So let's see what else I missed here. I think I pretty much got everything. So what you want to start paying attention to now is when you go to the grocery store, if you happen to be picking up something that has a label on it, look at the word total carbohydrates. That means total sugar. Subtract the fiber, that'll make it a net glucose, but just remember that you should not have more carbohydrates than you have protein. Let's keep the balance really, really even. When you eat fruit, let's eat it first thing in the morning on an empty stomach so they can help us for detoxification. If we want our grains, I tell my patients, go for a vegetarian meal that night. Have a beautiful kale salad with some quinoa on it, and throw some hemp seeds in there, throw some sunflower seeds in there, and you've got a fabulous meal. So again, you want to keep your grains away from your animal protein for better digestion. We talked about that last week in the proper food combining principle. So if we do this and we start to just be a little bit more conscious in what we choose, why we choose it, then we're going to have a fabulous sense of vitality. So I hope you enjoyed today's food for thought. We're not in my kitchen because it's getting revamped today. Next week we will be making a fabulous meal. I'm going to be making a turkey taco salad. It'll be wonderful. And if you enjoyed this video, please share it with your friends and tune in next week with us. And remember to find a sensational moment in the most ordinary things in life. Thank you.